Hi there, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rachel, and today we're talking about blood sugar, which is a really big topic and relates to almost every aspect of health. So, very excited to dive into this topic today. Like I said, my name is Rachel. I am the corporate wellness manager at Empower, and for the affiliated companies, I have a master's degree in nutrition. So I really do love nutrition. I love talking about everything nutrition. My contact information is up here if you would like to contact me with any thoughts or any questions you might have, and I'll put this up at the end as well so that you can contact me afterwards. So, the reason I chose blood sugar as a topic is because it is so foundational to health. If your blood sugar is imbalanced on a regular basis, you likely don't feel very good. You may experience a lot of fatigue or mood fluctuations. The obvious one here is that it is related to diabetes, and diabetes can progress to a lot of well known complications. So, things like heart disease, chronic kidney disease, nerve damage, and vision loss, just to name a few. Usually, of course, it's hopefully caught before it progresses to that point, but then there are medications involved in managing the blood sugar, which we'll talk about today. But outside of diabetes, too, like I mentioned, mood and energy, and also weight management. So, if you do have a goal to lose weight, blood sugar imbalance can be a really big barrier to losing weight. So, simply eating to balance your blood sugar is a huge step forward in that regard, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to break it down to the very basics to make sure everyone has a really solid understanding of what blood sugar is, because I think that term just gets thrown around a lot without really understanding what it means. So these are my pictures here. It is not to scale, of course, so enjoy my illustrations. So the carbohydrates, or you might hear these called as starches, or the sugars that we eat, get digested and absorbed into the bloodstream as glucose, which glucose is just a sugar molecule. So now the sugar is in the bloodstream. It is now referred to as blood glucose. The glucose has to move from the bloodstream into the cell to be used as energy. So you may remember that from high school that mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. They make ATP. Totally okay if you don't remember that. But basically, the glucose has to go into the cell in the mitochondria to make energy. So glucose actually can't go directly into the cell. It has to be transported in. And so the way it does that is with the help of a hormone insulin. And we've probably all heard of insulin, especially in terms of like taking insulin medication for diabetes. Well, the body actually makes insulin and it works like a key to unlock the cells to allow the glucose in. So this prevents glucose from building up in the bloodstream because the body actually has a very tightly regulated amount of glucose in the bloodstream, and too much can be toxic. So it has to get that blood glucose out and into the cell for energy. Now, if the cells don't actually need any for energy, there are a couple other places that glucose can go. So if there's this little storage of glucose called glycogen in the liver and the muscles, and so it can go to those. Those are like depleted during a workout or a period of not eating carbohydrates, for example. So glucose can go to refill those. And then if those glycogen stores are full and the body doesn't need any for energy, then that glucose will actually go get stored as fat, like body fat, for longer term storage. Blood sugar is always fluctuating over the course of a day. Insulin is being used to shuttle the glucose into cells, which is all normal and healthy. And as glucose is used, blood sugar decreases. So that's because it's being moved out of the bloodstream. So this, you can kind of look at this green line here for reference. This is the ideal range. It's very normal and healthy for blood glucose or blood sugar to rise and fall over the course of the day. So we wake up, we blood sugar is low when we wake up because we haven't eaten all night, but it's still within the range. We eat breakfast, something with protein, healthy fat, whole grains. It rises up gradually, but not too high. A couple hours pass, insulin shuttles that glucose into the cells. We're getting energy, and it gradually comes back down, and then we repeat over the course of the day. It never leaves that healthy, normal range. Now, this is the ideal situation. So, what happens for a lot of people is this dark purple line where we see a lot of blood sugar spikes and a lot of crashes. It's a very dramatic range. And so what happens is they wake up and it's very low, often because they had too sugary of a breakfast the night before and it dropped too low. So then they have a breakfast to bring it back up. They might have orange juice, which is full of sugar, cereal, which is all sugar and carbs, and fat free milk, which has very little fat, a little bit of protein, but it's a lot of sugar too. And that causes a dramatic spike in the blood sugar. It immediately shoots out of that normal range. So, with those blood sugar highs, you're feeling shaky, you've got brain fog. If it's really bad, you might have like increased urination as the body's trying to get rid of that extra glucose. The body has to get rid of this glucose because if it's in the bloodstream and there's too much, it's actually lethal. So it reacts by releasing a huge amount of insulin to get that glucose into the cells and out of the blood. But like I mentioned earlier, there's a problem with that because we don't just make more and more and more energy. When we have enough energy, that extra blood glucose will go to fat storage. If short term storage is full, that's the glycogen. So, for example, if you've recently done a really heavy workout, you've depleted your short term glucose stores, you can eat more sugar, it's going to go to refill those stores. But for most people, they may wake up in the morning and eat breakfast, a sugary breakfast, and they haven't recently working out. And so all of that is going, or all of that that's not being used for energy is going to fat storage. And so what happens is that that removal of glucose doesn't actually balance things out. What happens is because there was such a dramatic spike, tons of insulin was released, and it actually is a little bit too effective. And so it drops the blood sugar a little bit too low. So now you're feeling hangry, right? You're irritable, you're exhausted, you're yawning nonstop, you're falling asleep at your desk, you're crashing hard. And so you might, for example, go grab the donut from the break room that someone brought in because you're like, I just got to eat. And then it spikes again and then it crashes. And so someone who is living this kind of lifestyle probably spends most of the day feeling like crap. But the problem is that so many people live this way on a day to day basis that they don't really realize how crappy they feel. They might just think that this is kind of normal and it feels like, I could live like this. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. The problem is that abusing this insulin response to mitigate damage from high blood sugar will wear out. So let's talk about what happens when that insulin response does wear out. And you may be looking at the slide and wondering, why is there a child in a shark costume? But we'll get there. So in this situation, like the purple line before, crashes and spikes of blood sugar, the body is being told to make insulin constantly to bring down the high blood sugar. And it works for a while. But eventually the cells become resistant to insulin, which means it doesn't work quite as effectively as it used to open the cell to let glucose in. So the body compensates by making more insulin to do the same job. And that works for a while until the cells become less and less responsive to insulin. So eventually, your body is dumping out a ton of insulin to do the job that used to take very little insulin. And that's called insulin resistance. So, to kind of give you a metaphor here, imagine a baby. They cry, right? A little baby. They cry and they immediately have your attention. No questions asked. But as they get older, maybe they're 3 or 4, they start to want attention constantly for every little thing. Every 5 seconds, it's mom, dad, look, 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 look. And you learn that it's constant. And so what do? You start to tune it out, right? A little bit. You start to ignore them. And so what do the toddlers do? They get louder, right? Louder to get the same attention, just like more insulin to get the same response. The other situation you can imagine is a spam caller, like this woman. She's clearly online with someone who's spamming her. She's so frustrated. And let's say a spam caller calls from the same number and over and over and over. What do? You stop answering. So this is eventually what leads to prediabetes and diabetes, is that the insulin is no longer functioning like it used to, even though there's a ton of insulin being pumped out and that blood sugar remains high. This paradigm is called insulin resistance. Now, even before insulin resistance goes down that diabetic path, you may see a more common symptom of this, which is weight gain. So how does insulin resistance lead to weight gain? Well, insulin resistance means that the cells are not able to take up glucose for energy because they're not listening to that insulin. So that blood sugar remains higher for longer, and high blood sugar leads to more insulin being produced. Insulin signals for fat storage. So we get more energy, both carbohydrate and dietary fat, stored as body fat. And in turn, body fat actually worsens insulin resistance. So this is a hormonal method of weight gain because insulin is a hormone. Now, if you're interested in weight gain, next month's webinar, we are going to go deep into weight gain and weight loss. So I'll put a pin on that. But for now, just know that balancing the blood sugar is essential to preventing this paradigm. So insulin resistance is not something we want, and it leads to weight gain and blood sugar issues, not feeling good, and potentially down the path of type 2 diabetes. So how do we deal with this insulin resistance? The short answer is that in the early stages, we usually don't. We don't usually even know that this is happening at first. A lot of people that I've seen with blood sugar issues, they may just complain of like constant fatigue or excessive hunger and cravings is a really big symptom of this. And so that's not something that the doctors will usually diagnose. They'll say, oh, well, how's your sleep quality? And that's a fair question. But usually this early stages of blood sugar imbalance is not being caught until you go to the doctor one day and they say your A1C is high, you're pre-diabetic. So HbA1c, which is shortened to A1C, or it's called hemoglobin A1c, it's a measure of your 3-month average of your blood sugar. So to get to the point where this is elevated into the pre-diabetic stage, this insulin resistance has probably been going on for a little while. But based on your A1C and your glucose level at the time of blood work, which may or may not be fasting, they may prescribe a medication to manage your blood sugar. So if you are full-blown diabetic, they may say, hey, you need to take insulin because the best response to insulin resistance and a huge amount that your body is producing is to throw more on it to get that blood sugar down. That's kind of the best they can do at the moment. Other medications try to manage the blood sugar in other ways, like metformin, which tries to lower the amount of sugar that is absorbed into the bloodstream in the first place, so kind of stopping it earlier on. And Ozempic, which you've probably heard of now, it's been very much in the news for weight loss, that stimulates your body to produce more insulin. So why is this not a good thing? Well, one, I won't say it's overall not a good thing because there are people who need medications to help manage their blood sugar. And so, I don't want to say across the board that medications are a bad thing, but these medications do cost money. And so there is a financial burden associated with that, especially insulin. Insulin is very expensive. Two, they're not necessarily fixing the issue. They're band-aiding it at best. So they're not really going to the root of why that blood sugar is spiking and the cause of the insulin resistance. And then lastly, medications have a lot of side effects. So things like nausea, GI upset, headache, dizziness, tiredness. Medications can be a great part of treatment for some people, but they're not a quick fix for everyone, especially someone who's in these really earlier stages of insulin resistance and just feeling those mood and energy effects from imbalanced blood sugar. So the issue with blood sugar imbalances start with food. So it only makes sense to me that the answer is also in the food. So as a disclaimer, if you are on medications to manage your blood sugar or manage your diabetes, please do not just quit taking them. This is not a legal disclaimer. This is something I'm telling you because I've seen it time and time again. These nutritional strategies are effective. Yes, absolutely, but they do take time to work. And you need to work your way off of the medications that you're taking with the help of your doctor who can adjust that dosing slowly in an appropriate manner. And usually, if you go to a doctor and say, hey, I know I'm on these medications, but I've also been eating a little bit better, they'll be really happy to work with you on that. So, talking about the food, to try to balance out the blood sugar, the first thing we want to do is prevent it from spiking too high. So, what raises the blood sugar? Sugar and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are just complex conglomerates of glucose molecules that do break down into sugar. So I'm talking about rice, I'm talking about pasta, cake, all of these breads, these starches are carbohydrates that break down into sugar. Now they may break down faster or slower depending on the carbohydrate, but they do break down to sugar. So the more refined a carbohydrate is, the faster it will be absorbed and hit the bloodstream as sugar. So refined means that it has been stripped of bran, fiber, and nutrients. So there's actually a scale that they put to this, and it's called the glycemic index. And the glycemic index quantifies um, how the amount of a certain amount of carbohydrate will impact the blood sugar. And so things that stabilize the blood sugar are protein, fat, and fiber, because all of those slow digestion, which means that instead of a dumping of the sugar into the bloodstream, it's more of like a trickle. Um, and that means less of a glucose spike. So this is kind of the basis behind why everyone is always recommending like whole grains over refined. Eat whole wheat bread, not white bread. Eat whole wheat pasta, not white pasta. So knowing the glycemic index of a food in terms of numbers is not altogether important, but what is worth knowing is whether that food has sugar or carbohydrate and how much protein, fat, and or fiber to slow digestion and help stabilize the blood sugar. So I want to make this really practical. So I'll give you an example. When we talked earlier about the blood sugar spiking and crashing after a breakfast of orange juice, cereal, and skim milk or non-fat milk, what do all of these things have? Sugar or carbs. Almost no protein or fat. That skim milk does have protein, but all of the fat has been removed. So the lactose in it, which lactose is the natural sugar in milk, will have an effect on the blood sugar. And there may be some fiber in the cereal, but depending on the cereal, like probably not too much. And so those sugars and carbs in that breakfast digest and absorb rapidly, spike the blood sugar. So, for example, that meal may have 20 grams of protein, which is a decent amount, only 5 grams of fat, which is very low, and 74 grams of carbohydrates. So you can kind of see that those numbers are pretty imbalanced. So let's say in contrast, you have a breakfast of 2 eggs on whole grain toast with half an avocado. So your whole grain bread has carbohydrates, which is fine, but it also has fiber. Your eggs have healthy fat and protein and almost no carbohydrate. Your avocado is a healthy fat, really nothing there to spike the blood sugar. So this meal altogether, we're looking at 18 grams of protein, so about the same as the other meal, very close, but 21 grams of fat and 22 grams of carbohydrates, so much more balanced. So the goal here is to just balance out those carbohydrates with fat, protein, and fiber so that instead of spiking, it's just raising the blood sugar, but in a very natural, slow way. So minimize your sugar, portion control your carbohydrates, focus mostly on unrefined carbohydrates, and include fat, fiber, and protein to balance it out. So that kind of covers nutrition, but nutrition is not the end of this story. So, unsurprisingly, exercise is helpful too. So, keep in mind that exercise does not compensate for a poor diet indefinitely. It kind of can compensate for a poor diet if you're intensely working out for a little bit, but it will catch up to you. So, don't just go eat a bunch of sugary foods and then work out and think everything is fine, because it won't be. But exercise is very important alongside nutritional strategies. So, exercise actually directly improves insulin sensitivity. So, what we were talking about earlier was the cells got insulin resistant, they stopped listening, and insulin wasn't as effective at lowering the blood sugar anymore. Exercise improves that whole situation by making the cells more responsive to insulin. Exercise also uses up some of the stored glucose or glycogen in the muscle and liver, so that when you consume carbohydrates at your next meal, some of those will actually go towards replenishing those stores. And lastly, the last benefit here is more psychological, but it can have a really big impact. So people often like to eat a healthy meal before and after a workout. That's not always true, but there's actually been studies that show that people do generally tend to eat healthier when they're working out regularly. So, in terms of what types of exercise, everything is helpful and more is better within reason. So, high intensity interval training is great and effective, cardio is effective, weightlifting is effective, but also walking frequently, getting more movement throughout the day. Walking may not have the same impact as an intense workout, but if you do it consistently, it will absolutely be beneficial. So, the best form of exercise is the one that you can enjoy enough to do consistently. Outside of nutrition and exercise, lifestyle factors such as managing stress and getting adequate sleep are important as well. So, stress does impact the blood sugar. This is one reason why stress can make it harder to lose weight. When we feel stressed, our body is releasing cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol raises blood sugar by releasing stored glucose. So, this is actually an evolutionary adaptation. Think about long, long, long ago when we used to be faced with imminent danger, we would feel stressed. Our body released glucose for energy so we could fight or flight and run away from the threat. But now it's a very different environment. Our blood sugar is already high from food, and then our imminent danger is stress from an email or a work situation or a conflict. And you don't actually need increased energy to run away, but your body produces it nonetheless. So, chronic high stress can lead to chronic high blood sugar. Secondarily, some people do cope with stress by eating, and most people don't stress eat broccoli. It's usually comfort food like ice cream. Sleep is also an important piece of the puzzle. If you're not getting enough sleep, generally 7+ hours on a regular basis, this can worsen insulin resistance. It is also likely you feel tired after not getting enough sleep, which can lead to poor food choices. So you're too tired to cook, you're craving sugar for quick energy, you're kind of apathetic, feeling too tired to care about making a better food choice. So it is important that you're getting sufficient sleep as well. So, our takeaways here, whether your goal is to lose weight, get off your medications, prevent prediabetes from becoming diabetes, balance your blood sugar for better general health, or just to experience constant energy, or maybe just keep your blood sugar balanced if it already is, there are really simple things that you can do. So, number one, the foundation is nutrition. Minimize your sugar, portion control your carbohydrates, so one portion per meal. Don't double down on your starches. Choose unrefined grains most of the time. Include fat, protein, and fiber at each meal. Number two, get some exercise. Aim for daily walking. Aim for some more intense exercise 3 to 5 days per week. Again, the type of exercise is not as important as the fact that you are moving regularly. And there's no magic number. If you aren't exercising at all, then aim to get 2 days per week at the gym. And that's fantastic. The best exercise is the one that you actually do consistently. Number three, manage stress. Yes, I'm aware that this is easier said than done, and I know it can be irritating when somebody says to manage your stress, but any efforts that you take here can be helpful. Even if you don't go from super stressed out to the most calm person in the room, any effort you're taking is a win here. So, whether that's trying some meditation, doing counseling, self-care practices, or whatever you can do, exercise also will help with managing stress. So, anything you can do just to lower that stress a little bit is going to be beneficial. And lastly, number four, sleep. So, if you're not getting adequate sleep, change up your routine, schedule in 7 to 8 hours of sleep and more if you need it. Thanks so much for watching this webinar. I hope you got at least some valuable information out of this. If you have any questions, I highly encourage you to reach out to me. The best way is actually via email. Here's my email here. Please do make sure you spell my first name right or I won't get your email. You can also give me a call at this number, but please do reach out if you have any questions for me.